o'clock and we have a full schedule. So at this time, we will start the call to order the Wednesday, October 28th, 2020 meeting of the Champaign-Urbana Mass Transit District Board. I have 3 o'clock and I'm current board chair, Brad Dial. Ask for a roll call.
Barnes.
Here.
Bauer.
Here.
Chaplin.
Here.
Delgado.
Here.
Vasella.
Present.
Hannon. I think you already Dial.
Here. Bruce, we'll assume you're here. I'll also read that in accordance with Governor Pritzker's Executive Order 2020-07 COVID-19 Executive Order 5, which temporarily suspends the requirement for the Illinois Open Meetings Act requiring in-person attendance by members of a public body, this meeting will be held using a virtual meeting program. It is streamed live on YouTube, accessible at YouTube, blah, 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 blah. Also on the MTD's website, mtd.org. Audio video also be posted on our website at mtd.org after the meeting. Since the board meeting will not be open to the public due to Governor Pritzker's social distancing requirements, comments may be emailed to public@mtd.org. That is public@mtd.org. They will be read aloud in the audience participation portion of the meeting in the order that they were received. Email submissions will be accepted until the time reserved for audience participation is over. Each comment will be limited to 5 minutes. We've had our call to order and a roll call. Now we need an approval of our agenda for today's meeting. I'll ask for a motion second.
So seconded.
It's been moved and seconded to approve our agenda for today. Roll call, please.
Barnes.
Yes.
Bauer.
Yes.
Chaplin.
Yes.
Delgado.
Yes.
Vasella.
Aye.
Hannon. Dial.
Yes. We have a quorum. Audience participation. Any audience participation today?
No.
Nothing
I
to
have
read?
no
Nothing
emails
to read?
received.
Nothing to read?
No.
Okay. Now we need our approval of our minutes for our open session of September 30th, 2020.
So motioned.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the open session board meeting minutes from September 30th, 2020. All in favor? Roll call, please.
Barnes.
Yes.
Bauer.
Yes.
Chaplin.
Yes.
Delgado.
Yes.
Vasella.
Yes.
Hannon. Dial.
Yes, that motion carries. And now we need to approve the closed session minutes from our board meeting on September 30th, 2020. And I'll assume, Beth, that everyone has said that they've
Yes.
read those minutes. Okay. I ask for a motion and second on that also.
So motioned.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the closed session board meeting minutes from September 30th, 2020. Roll call, please.
Barnes.
Yes.
Bauer.
Yes.
Chaplin.
Yes.
Delgado.
Yes.
Vasella.
Yes.
Hannon. Dial.
Yes, that motion carries. Communications. Beth.
I know, Mr. Chair, you have desperately wanted Beth to read something, so we do have a communication this month that she'll be able to read. So,
She informed me of such.
so hold on to the edge of your seat.
We received a very lovely card from Darlene Bailey, and I'd like to read it. She says, I would like to extend a big thank you for the great operation of MTD in the past, but especially through this pandemic. I wanted to share a couple short actual incidences which prompted this contact, but the entire overall operation deserves an ovation. The first one, it was a cold, windy day back in March. I was going to Rural King. I asked the driver the length of time it would take her to go to Walmart and Research Park. She told me, and I hurried to Rural King and made my purchases. And I was on my way back to the bus stop when she passed, but I was still quite a ways off. She recognized me, stopped, and waited on me. I'm 67 years old and I don't move very fast anymore. The second item is I'm on the gray line, which was running a bit late. I asked to transfer to the lavender. The lavender had taken off even though she put in the transfer. The driver within limits and safety caught up with the lavender so I could make my connection. I have also witnessed many other wonderful, warm, and heartfelt help the drivers have given, and lots more. Thanks to all of you.
Thank you, Beth. We certainly appreciate that outreach from a happy customer. Additional communications for the board. The board have anything to share? All right. Our next item on our agenda is the Nelson-Nygaard route analysis.
Thank you. I'm going to hand it over to Jay Rank, our operations director, to introduce.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. So this is an introduction to this project. It's our comprehensive operational analysis. And basically, since the 1970s, we've had very few service changes, large service changes. We've had a lot of incremental service changes, but many of the segments have been similar for 45 plus years. So this has led to some questions about our service, especially among board members. So this is a board initiated project. About 5 years ago, we had a few board members that were interested in a grid system, and staff didn't feel like this was appropriate for our community, but we wanted to look into it. So we looked for a grant, and it took a few years for us to get one approved. But once it was, we went through this RFP process and took proposals and the deadline was October 2018. So we evaluated several proposals and chose Nelson-Nygaard based on a scoring criteria evaluation of similar projects, staff qualifications, subcontractors, et cetera. So we worked through the bid process, grant application, grant agreement, scope of work, task, deliverables, everything, and finally started work around August 2019. Without stealing anything from James and Nelson-Nygaard, we've had a few bumps in the road with this. The original Nelson-Nygaard project manager left for a different job and James stepped in. COVID-19 obviously took a toll on our timeline, our attention for a while, and our ability to meet in person. And it's really put a bigger question mark on our service. So that's something, of course, we're monitoring. So long story short, we're looking forward to getting this project out in front of you and out in the public so that we can discuss how to move our service forward. We're proud of our service and, of course, want to improve it. And we know that people depend on our service. So any outcome, we're very in tune with. So we've been impressed with James, Ian, and Aaron, their ability to come in, understand the service and the community and our partners. They've had some great ideas that we wouldn't have come up with on our own, and they've pushed us in ways that have led to some great and sometimes difficult conversations. So without further ado, here's James, Ian, and Aaron from Nelson-Nygaard.
All right, good afternoon. Thank you all for having us. We look forward to presenting our findings and recommendations for the comprehensive operational analysis, which was branded as MTD Next over the course of the study. As Jay mentioned, this is really an opportunity to bring in a consultant to take a comprehensive look at the entire system and also integrate community and stakeholder input to help develop different recommendations that will help move the agency forward in the future. The current slide shows the agenda of the different things that we will talk about over the next several minutes. And then at the end, we'd love to open it up to question and answer. The next slide, moving forward. I'd like to introduce myself as well as the other members of our team. So my name is James Gomez. I've been with Nelson-Nygaard for about 7.5 years now. Prior to that, I was a service planner at Capital Metro in Austin, Texas. I'm based in our Seattle office, and I had the opportunity to visit the entire service area. Jay was very kind to take me on a tour of I think every single route in the system. So that was really helpful in understanding the service area, the different challenges and opportunities as well. As Jay mentioned earlier, I stepped in January as project manager, and now I'd like to pass it on to other members of my team.
Hi, I'm Erin Rosenblum. I'm a transit planner in Nelson Nygaard's Boston office. I've been working there for a little over 6 years. And I have worked with Ian and James, as well as Matt Conover, an earlier person involved with the project from the start of the project last year. And also had the opportunity to travel there last year and participate in public engagement activities, which were really wonderful. And also get more familiar with the community and MTD service, their service area firsthand, which is just really wonderful to actually get a sense of how things are on the ground and just hear some really wonderful feedback from people. And I'll pass it on to Ian now.
Thanks. I'm Ian Kolsinskis. I'm an associate at Nelson Nygaard's Boston office, along with Erin. I've worked for the company for about 1.5 years now. Before that, I worked as a private consultant and also worked at the U.S. Department of Transportation. So I've also been a project planner on the COA since the beginning, and had the pleasure to travel out to the community a couple different times, both in the summer and in the winter. So that was my pleasure. And yeah, look forward to letting you know more about what we've been up to.
All right, next slide, please. All right, so just to give you a real quick overview of the entire project, our first step was to obtain an understanding of not only the service area, but also analyzing existing conditions, both in terms of how the service operates and performs, and also the underlying market conditions. So we looked at many different things such as demographics, socioeconomics, travel patterns, to get a good sense of what people are, what their different habits are, travel patterns, and also to identify any transit gaps or needs out there in the community. But really the best way in understanding what the different needs of the community was by engaging them through multiple activities. We also teamed with a community outreach firm based in Chicago, and Ian will be detailing those activities that took place back in the fall and just later on in the presentation. And then over the course of this year, go to the next slide, please. Beginning in January, we started the service recommendations process of first sharing with staff as well as the TAC different scenarios and concepts for service, and then working, collaborating with Jay and other members of the staff through an iterative process to try and refine those concepts and ultimately come up with a service recommendation that we'll be detailing at the end of our presentation. Next slide, please. Next, we'd like to detail some of the key findings that we've observed over the course of our analysis, beginning with one that is really the agency's greatest strength, and that is transit coverage across the cities of Champaign, Urbana, as well as Savoy, and a really strong focus on the university. MTD does a fantastic job of providing coverage throughout the communities. Most of the residents within your service area are within walking distance of a bus stop. And we view that as really one of the, not only one of the greatest strengths, but also clearly one of the agency's key values, and something that we wanted to acknowledge and remember that over the course of the project. Next slide, please. Another thing to point out is that major destinations, as well as some of the most dense areas, residential areas within your service area, do have good service today, meaning they have routes that operate late into the night, sometimes early morning. They also have frequent service. So in that regard, the agency does a fantastic job of providing service where it's most needed. Next slide, please. So the graphic on the right shows during whenever U of I is in session on a weekday, what the different routes level of service they provide, from both the start time early in the morning around 6 o'clock till some routes go late into the early morning hours. And the different colors represent the level of frequency. So where you have a darker color, red, that would indicate when service is more frequent, every 10 to 15 minutes. There are, in fact, 5 routes that run every 10 minutes throughout most of the day, and 2 other routes that run every 15 minutes. There are other routes that tend to taper off earlier in the evening, around 7 p.m. And there are some community routes that are less focused on the university, serving other parts of the community. And those routes may converge either at Illinois Terminal or in downtown Urbana. They don't quite have that same level of service. So there's quite a range in terms of level of service that's being provided for each route based on the areas they serve, the different markets they serve, and just the overall demand for transit service. All right, so next slide, pass it on to Erin now to talk about some of the other specific things we noted.
Sure. Among our findings were some information about the route alignment, so not just the level of service, but where they're actually going, how they're traveling. So there are a couple of routes that are pretty indirect. They might operate a more circuitous path, not necessarily taking the most direct route, providing more coverage, but maybe making travel times longer for most of the people who are riding, or taking longer to get to the destinations that they are trying to serve. Another challenge with this is that it can also make the route less intuitive to understand when you're trying to understand, where does this route go, or what is it doing? Where can this route take me? Particularly for new riders, just at a glance, trying to understand, when they'd be able to make use of this route as opposed to taking a different service. It can be a bit challenging to understand. If you go to the next slide, I think it's another example. So yeah, so having a large loop route like this, loop routes can be challenging. Sometimes they work well. Sometimes they can be very circuitous and force people to go out of direction to complete a round trip in the end. So depending on how it's working and where the different anchors are and what the different travel patterns are, it can be effective, or can make trips a bit more complicated or a bit more time consuming for riders. So that was just something else we wanted to consider. Go to the next slide. And some routes are also, they operate more complex service. This is one standout example, is the 5 green route. They can do a lot of different things depending on the trip that they're running. And so that really puts the burden on riders to try and decipher the schedule and figure out which service pattern is going to run on which trip, and when can they take this supposedly one route to get to where they need to go. So yeah, this can make it more difficult to understand, will this route or will this service take me where I need to go when I need to go there? Ideally, it would be just more obvious or more easier to intuit if this route is going to get them to where they need to go. So having complicated service patterns like this really poses an additional challenge, especially to newer riders. Next slide, please. And then a bit similarly, the schedules can also be overly complex. So especially by presenting different schedules for different days or different times of day, it can be really challenging for riders to understand the system as a whole, and to know where the routes are going to take them at different times, or not understanding it as one system and what the full schedule looks like. So just showing it like this, it makes the system even appear more complicated than it is necessarily, just because it's tough to kind of decipher which schedule do I need to look at? Do I need to know ahead of time? Am I traveling late afternoon or early evening? And what difference is that going to make? Similarly, there are several routes that might operate along very different alignments at different times, kind of morphing almost into another bus network that riders need to learn and remember if they're going to travel at different times. So having a network that's a bit difficult to decipher and that might change on them, and needing to remember that in order to use it is an additional challenge. Next slide, please. And I'll pass this back to James.
Thanks, Erin. And just one more thing to build upon Erin's point is that you have so many new students arriving every year to college, many of whom rely on transit. They have to learn the new system. Naturally, with transit, there's just turnover every couple of years. You have newer riders to the system. they're having to understand a really complex system, especially if they have destinations that they're trying to get to across the service area. So many of the recommendations that we'll detail later on in the presentation really focus on just trying to simplify things for the average user, especially the first time user, not those that have been riding for a long time and have managed to figure it out already. So next I want to talk a little bit about bus stops. Back in fall of 2016, MTD transitioned from a flag stop policy in which riders could just wave down a bus at pretty much any street corner to a designated stop system where there are signs at each and every bus stop. That's had very many benefits in terms of improving safety as well as efficiency. And we applaud you for making that change. And now's the time that you can really start thinking about the next step, which is trying to, one, look at, do you actually need that many stops? There are over 2,000 bus stops system-wide. And in a lot of places, certain corridors, they're only 1 to 2 blocks apart. So really short distance. They're not all being used every single trip, but it can lead to slower service, which can then mean lower on-time performance and just missed connections, things like that. So there's an opportunity to really take a comprehensive look at all the bus stops and determine, one, are there opportunities to consolidate them, have fewer stops, so you can have more efficient service, but you could also cut down on your cost to improve bus stops. Today, a lot of the stops don't meet minimum ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, minimum requirements in terms of having a 5x8 concrete pad, level pad. So in the future, as the agency looks to upgrade all the bus stops, it's something that FTA is always pushing you to do, encourage you to do. It would be good to have a smaller number of bus stops to work with. So just something to consider moving forward with this in terms of bus stops. Next slide, please. So the next two graphics show your entire bus stop network with ridership. So the larger the circle, the more ridership at that particular stop. The range is from less than 1 boarding per day to over 500. And we just wanted to highlight some of the areas that have the highest ridership. If you could please go to the next slide. Obviously, the university is the biggest generator within the system. And there are also areas outside of the university, not residence halls, but off-campus housing that generate ridership, bringing students into campus and back out. Illinois Terminal is also your primary transfer point. But in addition to those, there are several commercial districts across both cities, Little Savoy, that have higher ridership, as well as Parkland College, for example, social service agencies that are clustered around the Round Barn area, as well as medical locations that maybe don't have as high ridership, but they're still really important. And they tend to have different users every day rather than the same users who might be going to places of employment, for example. So we want to highlight those that have the highest ridership, but also take a moment to look at those that aren't really generating very much, if any, ridership. So if you could back up one slide, please. This map shows in gray dots the stops that do not have any ridership or less than 1 boarding per day. So those tend to be in some of the outlying areas that have lower density. For similar systems of this size and comparable service areas, you would not even see fixed route service. So again, going back to one of the key missions of the agency is trying to provide extensive coverage. One drawback is that you have very little return on that, and what it means is that you have to provide less service in corridors that maybe warrant additional bus service. We could please move forward 2 slides now. So this graphic just shows the ridership broken down by route, from the highest to the lowest. And the route that has the highest ridership currently, the 22 Illini, represents or carries almost 1/4 of all the riders in the system. You include the next 5 routes after that, and that constitutes about 3/4 of all your ridership. So clearly the university is really important, and that we want to focus services around the university, but also look at ways to improve the service in some of the other areas that are in showing up in the middle part of the chart to try and make transit more attractive along those corridors and neighborhoods. The next graphic shows on-time performance. So the percentage of trips at specific time points that are listed in the schedule that are on time. And when we measure on-time performance in transit, in the transit industry, it's trips that are within 1 to 5 minutes, or 0 to 5 minutes rather. So some of the routes that have the lowest on-time performance, they're every 2 out of 3 trips or 3 out of 4 trips are on time, are those that have the many variations or deviations. Aaron provided an example earlier, the green route that has a very complex schedule. And some of those routes that are more complex, either in the routing or the schedule that are provided, result in lower on-time performance. Some of those that have lower on-time performance also have to do with just the high ridership that occurs and just the turnover. So it's more difficult in congested areas such as around the university to maintain that schedule. But clearly, by streamlining some of the more complex routes, both their alignments and their schedules, there's an opportunity to improve on-time performance system-wide. Next slide, please.
Thank you. So I'm going to be talking about ways that we engaged with the community during this process. So we use several different methods to connect with the community and engage with key segments of MTD ridership. So we had an onboard survey, and we received over 2,000 responses to that. We held an open house with activities and had conversations with community members, asking them where they take the bus now, where they'd like to be able to take the bus. We held a few pop-up events, which were my favorite. We held one at the Urbana Sweet Corn Festival, where we spoke to a broad cross-section of the community. And then also the University Quad Day, where we talked to students, particularly incoming freshmen who are just learning the MTD system for the first time. We had an online survey activity with over 300 responses. We also conducted interviews with some stakeholders, including regional planners, city planners, and staff from both Champaign and Urbana. The TAC workshops were a way to discuss community needs, as well as getting into transportation planning and speaking about different transit trade-offs. And then we were also able to present to the Champaign City Council in order to tell them about the existing conditions we observed, as well as initial findings. And we continue to maintain a project website to keep the public up to date on this project. Next slide, please. So overall, we heard that people across the community view MTD very positively and value the service that it provides. So we should all feel good about that. So talking with folks, we found that they favored smaller tweaks to the service rather than big overhauled changes, such as implementing a grid system. One of the biggest things we heard was that people would like more weekend and evening service throughout the community, not just around the university. So we found that people are looking for service that's easier to understand. So there's some confusion around route numbers and colors. Some of the alignments are quite convoluted or circuitous, and routes tend to change spans throughout the day and depending on the day of the week. So many new students, for example, find that the system's hard to learn. People in the community were looking for better connections between major destinations and more opportunities to transfer to the routes that they need in order to get there. In speaking with people, we found that they did have an understanding of the trade-off between directness and having faster routes that are along major corridors versus having coverage so that anyone that needs to take the bus is able to get to the route. So, you know, with that, I think the community understands that there's a need for a hybrid approach, sort of bespoke to the community, which our recommendations reflect. And then finally, overall, we found that people are looking for just better communication, more information. So a more helpful website, better trip planning capabilities, simpler schedules, and more real-time information. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Ian. Before we show through via several maps the different service recommendations, just want to highlight those and provide a quick summary. So we were looking to provide recommendations for streamlining several of the routes that currently are more indirect. A lot of times that just happens over time as you receive requests from riders to extend a route to this destination or into this neighborhood. So it's really an opportunity to just try and streamline the system as a whole. But also, we also look to recommend a couple of new crosstown routes, both in Urbana and Champaign, that would allow people to get to their destinations without having to go to a major transit hub. Earlier in the meeting, there was mention of somebody who was trying to get to the Walmart in North Champaign and having to take 2 bus routes to get there. In a moment, we'll show our recommendations for a route that would provide better access to that Walmart location from Western Champaign so that you don't have to go down through the terminal to transfer. In addition to that, just looking to make schedules easier to understand and trying to put service in areas where it's really most needed. So there are always tough decisions that need to be made whenever making wholesale route system changes, but we wanted to provide a couple of recommendations in where you might pull service out of neighborhoods with really low ridership levels and reinvest that into stronger corridors. And we'll get through some of these additional bullets after we go through the maps. So if we could please go to the next graphic. All right, so here's a look at the proposed system map. And one thing that I just want to first note is that we try to preserve coverage throughout the service areas as much as possible.
Sorry, I think you need to advance one more slide. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, actually, if you could go back one more, I'm sorry about that. So this is the existing system. And if you were to transition to the new one, you can see that the coverage remains relatively similar on the next slide. There are 2 areas, both in the west and northeast, that are highlighted in blue. And those indicate where on-demand service is recommended. There's currently on-demand service in Western Champaign called West Connect. And the areas, the alignments there have dashed lines. Those are trips that are not all day. So only serving those periphery locations during select hours. In red, in the center of the map, you'll see a 100 series of routes. So beginning with a 100 or greater. Those are all routes that are various forms of existing routes that serve the university. They are just renumbered and classified a little bit differently. And the reason for that is to try to make it very easy to understand for university students who, again, you're getting thousands of new students every year, being able to really just focus on a subset of routes that students tend to use daily and make it easier for them to understand how to get around. The next slide, I'll let Aaron and Ian talk about these.
Thanks. So you can see here is our recommendation for a new crosstown route. So it's sort of a rethinking of what the pink route was, and this fills an existing gap. Currently, there's no direct service from Round Barn Road or Parkland College to Walmart and the North Prospect shopping area. So as we spoke of before, this is a way to provide connections across Western Champaign in order to serve major destinations without having to have folks go all the way downtown or to campus in order to transfer to the route that they need. Next slide, please. And this we see as an Urbana community route. So this route connects shopping, dining, medical, employment, and residential destinations throughout Urbana. And so that way folks in that city are able to get where they need to go without having to go all the way into Champaign to transfer to a different route. And this also does have the central hub at Lincoln Square in order for folks to be able to get to those transfers a little closer to home. Next slide, please. And I'll throw it back on over to James.
Okay, so again, I mentioned earlier the areas that are shown in blue are recommended for on-demand service only. So an extension of the West Connect over on the west side of Champaign, and then in Northeast Urbana, the northeastern corner of the service area, recommend eliminating the current service provided in that area, which is a combination of routes 10 and 11. And you'll hear us refer to many of the routes by color. That's common practice today. That's something that we're actually recommending to move away from because there are so many colors and some of them are really hard to distinguish on a map, and moving more towards a corridor-based or anchor-based system of naming, but we can get to that in a moment. And then lastly, the other smaller circles represent the endpoints of certain routes where we have service being extended to different neighborhoods or employment centers just during certain times of day. So today you do this in a number of areas. Actually, you do so in 2 of these areas, but we also recommended pulling out of areas such as Yankee Ridge or other extensions that really just aren't quite serving populations with high need, and reinvesting that service elsewhere in the system. This slide shows, again, the university subset, the 100 series of routes, and would really distinguish those routes from the others, but they would, you'd be able to ramp them up and down whenever school is in session or not in session. And the next slide shows those on their own. The biggest change here is splitting apart your current Route 22, which was the highest ridership route in the system, breaking that into 2 different routes, the 122 in the north serving the Lincoln Avenue corridor, which is where you have a lot of off-campus student housing. And then the 123 becomes a new route, which is more of a campus circulator. Another new route within this mix is the 124, which would serve the Research Park area. All right, so just in summary, the benefits of these proposed route changes really start with just providing a more intuitive, simple, easy to understand route network that's really serving as the foundation for future service expansion. It improves connections by having route frequencies that are more consistent across the board, either 15, 30, or 60 minutes at night. Also reducing the number of transfers by having 2 new crosstown routes, and having fewer variations within the schedules and the routes so that they are much more consistent throughout the day, and from weekdays to weekends. You don't have to refer to 6 different schedules for an individual route. So this graphic shows how we recommend making the route and schedule changes during the first phase, which we're calling the restructure of service. It requires a small increase in service hours, 5% approximately, and does not require any additional buses. It could be done with slightly less than 5% by making a couple of frequency adjustments. But the point is that it's a small investment, and it allows you to focus resources on where they're most needed, and overall just set the stage for larger enhancements. Phases 2 and 3 are in response to what we heard from the community. So growing weeknight service, also weekend service through 2 phases. Each of those require larger investments for increasing the number of service hours, but do not require any additional buses. And the graphic on the right just shows how the number of hours expands over the course of these 3 phases. And it also shows how Saturday and Sunday service is expanded pretty significantly over that time. So capital needs are also something that will be outlined in our final report. The fleet replacement plan, so replacing buses as they meet the end of their useful life. Also, as we mentioned earlier, there are opportunities to improve bus stops across the system by consolidating stops along certain corridors, as well as developing an improvement plan for accessibility, as well as adding more amenities at key bus stops. And then we also recommend that MTD moves forward with looking at potential secondary transit hubs at a couple of strategic locations. Round Barn is one where you have several routes converge and connections are made on street. And that's one area that could be studied for a more of a sub transit center, or a smaller transit center, or more of a neighborhood hub. And that concludes our presentation. We are happy to answer any questions that you might have about the recommendations, our process, as well as individual route changes that are recommended.
All right, we'll open that up to the board. Anyone here in the room have any questions for these folks right now? Anybody online from the board, questions? I do have a couple questions that I would like to ask. One, is there a specific group that asks for more evening and weekend service, or was that real broad based?
So I was involved with, community engagement pretty much at all steps. So I would say that's broad-based. In general, I think that the students, as far as the campus routes, are well covered on nights and weekends. But in general, the rest of the community, folks are looking for a bit more service for any of those routes that are not right in the center of town.
Okay, thank you. And then my second question, you actually asked part of that about, I was going to ask about existing equipment and personnel being able to handle your route recommendations. For the service hour increases, that's a proposal or a recommendation from you. You've got kind of a tiered 5, 10, and 20%. What's the cost of a service? Do you have a cost of a service hour there? What's the impact of that? Because obviously, if the equipment can handle it, it's obviously going to generate more maintenance and a number of other issues equipment-wise. But the real cost is going to be the operations cost there. How did you come to any conclusions on what that factor might be?
Yeah, I can answer that, and Jay, you might be able to help clarify. We like to use service hours as the basis for estimating the increase, and you would just need to multiply your fully allocated rate. Jay, do you happen to have that number handy, the updated fully allocated rate?
Was it about $140?
Okay.
Does it depend on route?
116.
Does it depend on a route, or are there other factors involved?
Fully allocated cost per hour, it takes all the costs, 100% of our operating costs, and just divides that by our revenue service hours. And so it's a equalized across the board cost per hour.
Okay.
So based on that number, go ahead, Jay.
Yeah, so for the phase one, which is 5% higher, is about almost 14,000 hours a year higher. It'd be about 1.6 million fully allocated.
Okay, we can figure everything else out from there. That's pretty much what I wanted to know. Any other questions from the board? Dick, you got your finger on the pulse there. Go ahead.
Yeah, just wondering mechanically, how do you recommend informing the public of these changes? Are there several ways that you do this?
Yeah, so I mean, that's the next phase, I guess, is deciding how to implement and what to implement, and then when. You know, we aren't sure at this point what exactly we would want to pursue out of this, and we'd have to figure that out and get input from the public going forward. So I imagine this could be done over a 3 to 5 year phase, and break them up into implementable pieces and get feedback from the community on all of it. So ultimately that'd be the next step for us to work towards after the project wraps up.
I could see quite the learning curve for somebody who takes the red line and all of a sudden it's the 102 or whatever.
Yeah, communication is always an important part with a change like this. And I want to just append onto what Jay just said. Everybody knows this already, but I'm just going to say it out loud. You know, we are in a goofy time, and obviously this is not a result of anything that Nelson Nygaard did. They were great, but you know, we have a pandemic going on and everything is crazy right now. Our usage, our utility, our costs, our revenues, everything is goofy and out of whack right now. So now is not the time to start looking at changes. Kind of like what I've been saying over the last 5 years relative to MCOR. You know, while we're in the midst of this big thing that's already happening, we're going to have all kinds of unintended consequences if we make changes in a time of change. And so we need to let things settle a little bit and get out of this period of time, and then we can dig back into this. Normally, there wouldn't be a delay between the time that they finish a report like this and we start taking it up and looking at it. But I would strongly encourage that we kind of tap on the brakes right now and just pause and let everything settle so that we know what the game board looks like.
Then you have the yards as well.
Yeah. Yes, that certainly could impact things too. That will impact how we operate around the Illinois terminal. That might not impact so much the way that we look at route equity and route considerations. So I do think that we could start the conversation even if the yards is underway.
Margaret.
I guess it's not entirely clear to me why you think the numbering system and the color system that we use needs to be changed. I have to say, I usually think that, oh, I need to catch the blue west. That seems kind of a little more intuitive than thinking, oh, 123, 135.
James,
So
go ahead.
Sorry. So I think the thinking behind that is there's a lot of different naming conventions going on all at once, where there's a number and there's the color, and the color doesn't necessarily tell you anything about where the route goes or where it's primarily serving. So I think it's really just a matter of having fewer name factors. You know, if it's just the number or just the color that people are kind of going to as far as their default for what they refer to the route as. I think that's really just where we want to go. And then as far as including, maybe here's the corridor, or here's, kind of the two main destinations that it serves, using that as a name or as a cue that really tells you what this route does or where it's going to take you, as opposed to just having a color. So I think that's sorry, go ahead.
I say, I will admit that there's sometimes confusion. I have known there's confusion, I think, between the yellow and the gold. People hop on the yellow when they should be hopping on the gold. I mean, where you have colors that are somewhat similar to each other, where the two routes are at the same stop or the same hub. But I myself kind of like being able to say, I want to take the gold.
Phil.
I would say last week I was about a half hour late for a meeting and had to walk about 1.5 miles because I hopped on the wrong green by mistake. So they were right next to each other and I just didn't think. So it happened.
Any additional questions from board members, either here or online?
This is Linda. Not specifically a question, but I've been on the board for 10 years. I think it's always good to take a step back and reevaluate what we're doing. I don't ride as much now, but I used to ride regularly down through Yankee Ridge and kind of agree that I'm in Urbana. Kind of agree that there's some areas, if we have maybe some response service, we don't necessarily need a route. And the other thing is any changes we make, our population, especially the majority of the people or students who ride the bus, that turnover is a lot. So even though we would possibly implement some new numbering or colors or routes, those people, it'll be new to them and they'll learn it. And I don't think that's as big of a problem. So good to take a look at it and decide what to do, even though we can't do it right this moment.
Thank you, Linda. Additional questions or comments from the board? Go ahead, Bruce.
Yeah. In your route designs, do you ever use anything like constrained wait time minimization?
I'm sorry, you say constrained wait time minimization?
Wait time. Customer wait time.
Bruce, are you saying customer wait time? It's not clear what you're saying.
Oh, that's what I'm saying.
Okay, thank you.
Right, yeah, so for the most part, many of the routes that have the highest, that serve the highest demand areas operate very frequently. And that's one thing we pointed out early on, that one of the key strengths is the service coverage provided, but it's also the level of service. The frequencies that you see are not common for cities of your size. They're much more frequent. So wait time really isn't an issue on those university focused routes. For some of the community routes, and I'll give one example, would be in Champaign, you have the Lavender route, which serves high need area and runs every 35 to 40 minutes. So that's going to be an average wait time of 18 to 20 minutes. Just if you're not looking at a schedule, if you're just walking out to a bus stop, it's approximately half the frequency. So that is something that we did look to improve, was just across the board for community routes, try to have at least 30-minute service or better throughout the day, and also on weekends as well over time through the phase 3 enhancements. So I'm not sure if that answers your question or not, but I think for community routes, yes, we were more thoughtful about customer wait time and how to shorten that.
Yeah, and I think to that point as well, having more crosstown service, or having to either make the direct transfers better, or having more one-seat rides so that folks don't have to, wait at a transfer point or go into downtown and back out again, was definitely another way we wanted to improve that, and just reduce the amount of time that people had to wait, or the number of transfers that they had to make to complete their trip.
I will add, we haven't written the schedules yet for these, so we don't know exactly what the transfers are going to look like. However, Regional Plan Commission is applying for an IDOT grant, the same grant mechanism that we got for this project, that would look to evaluate this proposal and compare it to see what the impact would be on the community.
Okay, go ahead, Phil.
I did have one question for you, just from the rental property perspective. I see this with students, and I have a theory that it's happening in the community, but I have no evidence of it. We get kids that will choose their rental housing based on proximity to transit. And one of the things I felt, you mentioned the lavender, I felt that people will choose in the community to live close to bus stops if that's something they value. And sort of in the long term, there's some elasticity where people will sort if we streamline these routes. So maybe not every house in Dobbins Downs is within a block of a bus route, but over the course of 4 or 5 years, people will, choose their housing based on where our bus routes are, and we can avoid some of those sort of more circuitous routes. And I was wondering, did you get any feedback from community members? Hey, I chose to rent or buy or whatever close to the bus line because I know, I'm going to need the bus, or my special needs child needs the bus, or my mother is elderly and she comes on the bus, that sort of thing. Did you hear anything like that?
I'll defer to Ian first since he was involved with community outreach.
So I guess the most relevant example that comes to mind is at the open house. I spoke to a man who teaches at Parkland Community College, and he lives in that part of town, but unfortunately with the current system, he's actually not very close to transit. So basically he has to take, I think it's the Lavender route to a transfer point in order to get another route to go to Parkland College. So even though, right now he lives near where he works, he can't easily get there on transit. So I think, yeah, with improving crosstown service and exactly as you were saying, streamlining routes, I think this would help a lot of folks in the community be able to more easily get where they need to go. And as you said, base their lives around that.
I would add that through our experience at MTD hearing about changes, that's absolutely something we're aware of. And probably one of the reasons why we don't want to change routes too often, because people invest in areas around transit, not just rent, but also invest. So, so we just have to be, considerate and careful about, any change we make, however small or large.
All right, one more time around the horn for the board. Any additional questions or comments from the board? Any additional input from staff right now? Well, James and Ian and Aaron, we certainly want to thank you for your work on this project. It's been something that the Service Delivery Committee and this board has wanted for a long time. We certainly appreciate it. And we certainly appreciate the work that Jay and his staff and all MTD staff members have put into this and their input. So at this time, I will consider this report accepted and we will move on to our next item. Thank you, guys. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Our next item on our agenda is the Managing Director's report. Carl.
All right, thank you. So this is reporting on September. And September ridership dropped about 74.7% compared to last year. We had 296,847 rides versus 172,335 rides last September. I will note that September did show about a 30,000 ride or 11% increase from August. So while it is a significant drop still from last year, we're at least creeping upwards in the right direction. September 2020 operating revenue was 13.6% below September of 2019, and it probably goes without saying, but I'll say it anyway. That is primarily because we are not collecting fares due to COVID-19. However, the September operating expenses were only 0.7% above September of 2019. So staff continues to do a great job in withholding expenditures and really monitoring things closely. And so that's positive. I'd like to note, we got a little error in the year-to-date revenue and expenses. Here it says FY 2020 operating revenue budget versus actual, and same with the expenses, and that's obviously FY 2021. That's the fiscal year that we're in, so we'll get that corrected next month. But the numbers, the data is correct in there. That's just in the title. The year-to-date operating revenues are 307,000 below budget, while operating expenses are $1,799,531 under budget. And then I would just like to point out that the draft environmental assessment for Illinois terminal expansion at the yards has been sent to the Federal Transit Administration. And so things are continuing to move with the yards NEPA analysis, and it's looking very positive, and we've been getting great feedback. And if you want to look at the yards project page on our website at your leisure, then or you can go to itetheyards.com and that will lead you there also. But the feedback that we got through the public feedback window is all posted on there with our responses to it. So with that, I will take any questions that you have, excuse me, that you have through page 37.
I'm going to start just by I'm sure you've told us this before. Remind us of what's the timeline of the NEPA analysis. Do we have an idea what the scope of time is going to be for
We
that?
have an idea. It's a little hard to say for sure because there are a lot of outside agencies that are involved with it that we, certainly don't have any control or influence over. And we're in the middle of a pandemic. And so, that's affecting everybody's ability to do things. But I think we're loosely counting on next summer to be the end date for it. Jane, is that correct? So I think June, something like that. But that's obviously tentative.
Thank you. Additional questions from the board on Carl's report through page 37. Phil.
Carl, I know I bring this up every time we talk about CDs, but I would like to see something done with our investment policy, especially since we're sort of at a point of having to choose a new custodian, to see if there would be some way to place at least some of our reserves with insured local institutions. So banks that have branches or do lending inside the district, if we could figure out a way to get $250,000 CDs with some of those institutions to try to keep some of these reserves that we're taking from, local people back into our community as loans to local individuals or local businesses. Even if we did take a little bit of a hit on the interest rate, I think our investment policy should be reflecting our goal of developing the local economy and taking care of people here.
Duly noted. Like you said, we've talked about this before. It's a little bit of a there are a lot of competing masters in this. One is that we have to be financially responsible for the district. And so I think looking at returns is important. And so that is not something that we should set aside just in order to have local holdings. In particular, since having our money in a local bank doesn't mean that it's necessarily being invested locally. Banks are members of consortiums, and what appears to be local might actually be regional or state or something bigger than that. And so I get and I appreciate what you're saying and your perspective. I just want to be careful about cutting our nose off to spite our face, because we could be trying to do a good thing, but not actually accomplishing a good thing, but then hurting the district at the same time. And so I want to be careful about that. And I know that's not what you're saying we should do, but I just want to be careful. And then having said all of that, as we are pulling CDs out of Morgan Stanley as they come to term, Those are, I think I can say, Michelle can shoot daggers at me if I'm wrong, but I think it's fair to say that those are going into local and or at least regional banks anyway. So we're not currently doing new investments in a national or international type of entity. Is that accurate?
It's very true. Michelle Wright, Finance Director. And also it will be on the agenda here in the coming months to revisit the investment policy. The last time it was updated was 2006. Might be good to update it since we're going to be entering 2021. And we also need to make sure that we have the new Sustainable Investing Act that Illinois is requiring. It's just where you have to consider how your investing may impact the environment. It doesn't necessarily force you to make decisions on that, but it's wording we need to have on our policy. So I already have one meeting set up with the local bank in November. Plan to do that with all the other banks that we already do business with, and come up with an investment policy that will definitely head your guys' way.
Additional questions for Carl on his report? Anybody out in? No, nothing. All right. Thanks, Carl. Our first action item for our meeting is Resolution 2020-4, determining amount of money necessary to be raised by the tax levy. Carl.
All right, thank you. So this is an exercise that we go through annually to comply with the a variety of taxation laws that we fall under. And so this is the step where we pass a levy resolution, which then sets the levy, and we publicly post the levy, and then we'll hold a public hearing at the next meeting in December, and then vote to approve the levy ordinance, which we will then file with the county clerk. So as we have for the last several years, staff is asking that you consider that the hospital properties are still being discussed in court. This has been a 10-year long now case, and though there was a ruling, that ruling is being appealed. So we just still continue to have this dark cloud hanging over our heads. And when I say we, I mean every taxing body in the state of Illinois. It's not just the MTD. And so we don't know which, what, or to what degree, or if any of the hospital properties that are under question will eventually be put on the tax rolls. And so there's a percentage applied to our tax levy that contemplates all of the hospital properties coming on the tax rolls, even though I think I don't think it's reasonable to assume that that would actually ever occur to that degree. But since we don't know, we are asking to have a bucket that is sized appropriately for that maximal amount, knowing that if it's less than that, or if the case continues to not be resolved, that bucket will still hold the amount of the levy that we end up being allowed to collect. But that also does not cost the local taxpayer any money by setting the bucket at a size that would collect that new property. And just to remind you, because of the property tax if I get this right, the property tax estimation limitation law or something like that, PTEL, that says that if we do not collect EAV, assessed equalized assessed valuation, the year that it comes onto the tax roll, we can never access it again after that. It becomes unusable or inaccessible to us after that first year. And so that is why we are doing this, so that we can take advantage of property that becomes available to us, because we can never do that again. So I think I probably run that into the ground, and I'll leave that.
You
for your
have the
discussion.
potential to take advantage of it.
Sorry?
You have the potential to take advantage of new property should it come on.
Should it become available?
Otherwise, you don't have the opportunity.
That's correct. Yes.
Thanks.
And because of the timing of when we have to do all the
Sure.
filing, we don't know what will and what won't be available.
Questions from the board?
Where in the
Bruce, go ahead.
Bruce, where in the handout for this meeting are the pages for what we're talking about?
Okay, in the board packet, the property tax levy starts at page 38. If you have the packet in front of you.
I do, and I looked at that one, and I looked at the other. There are always this crazy way of paging it. I'm looking now at page what? I'm not sure which paging setup I'm into here. Page 38 with it across the bottom or across the side?
It's 38 on the bottom. Yeah, you're right. There are some pages that have multiple page numbers. I apologize for that, but yeah, I'm referring to the ones, the main page number on the bottom of the page 38. He's
looking at the book.
paper
Got
copy.
it. I see it.
You got it?
Yep.
And then the actual resolution starts on page 39 and goes to page 40. So we're discussing pages 38 through 40.
Earl,
Go
Yes.
ahead. This is Fred. When you're talking about the what the board is approving, I wanted to put it in perspective. You're not approving the tax levy now. You're approving an estimated tax levy. Statutes require all taxing bodies to do an estimated levy prior to the time that you actually levy take the formal action to levy the amount. So this is an estimated levy. What this does is it says it goes into the factor of whether there has to be a notice and a public hearing. In other words, if you're below a 5% increase, there's no requirement for a notice or a public hearing. If you're above in your estimated levy, which is what you're doing today, then there's a requirement for notice and hearing. I just wanted to put that in perspective. It's inappropriate or it's not correct to talk about this as the levy because it's not. You don't levy till the next meeting.
Right. That's what I meant with the ordinance. So maybe I didn't make that clear. And it did occur to me while you were talking, I mentioned PTEL and its property tax extension limitation law.
All right. If Bruce is done, Phil.
Actually, this is a question for Fred. Hypothetically, if we wanted to change this amount or modify it, is that possible?
Well,
I mean, can the board, can the board amend what's in front of you?
I can answer that. What if you could instruct staff to make a change to this? You could say, we don't want to do it at 18.14%. We want to do it at X percent. And then we can adjust the resolution to accommodate that. You have the ability to do that. You do need to pass a resolution or we will get crosswise with the timing of our law restrictions.
Okay. It's just not ever been clear to me, sort of the ability to make any kind of changes. But once, let's say we approve this, then we can't make any changes before the next meeting. I just want
to. That's not correct. You can make a change all the way up until the time that you actually pass the levy. You might have to do another notice in a hearing after the fact. The statutes permit that.
Okay.
But this is an estimated levy. This is, a good faith estimate as to what you expect the levy to be for the purposes of publishing the truth and taxation notice. But when it comes time to do the actual levy, possible to levy more or less. If you levy more than you've estimated and you've had a hearing, you might have to have another subsequent hearing. That's what the law provides for.
I hope not to get too far down this rabbit hole, but I do want to caution. I believe we have to file the levy with the county clerk. Is it the third Tuesday of December, Beth? And so our next board meeting is December 9th. I don't have a calendar open in front of me, but that is, there is very little room between December 9th and the third Tuesday, whatever that is. And so
it's the 15th.
okay, so there's almost no room, and I don't think we could comply with the law, Fred, if we made a change on December 9th. I don't think that we would be able to put a notice in the, well, maybe we could maybe just make it, but we'd have to hold another public hearing and have another meeting in time for us to pass the ordinance by that filing date.
Well, I'm not suggesting that we do that. But I just want to be sure about what the procedure is. So we would say approve 18 point whatever it is today, and then change our minds by the final meeting. That is legal, but we have to go through these other procedures again.
Correct.
The hearings and refiling and all that stuff.
Correct.
Thank you.
Additional questions from the board?
This is Linda. Again, no questions. I've been through this many times and wrote a guest editorial about it. People do misinterpret this, but one thing that and I'm just repeating pretty much what Fred said, it's an estimate, it's a bucket. We present this bucket that can capture the tax dollars. Probably won't get filled up. Probably maybe won't get close to filled up. But if those other properties come on board that we want to capture, we have enough room, because if we have no bucket but a measuring cup and those come on the tax rolls, we don't have a way to capture those. So, we can adjust the numbers and so on, but basically it's allowing us the room to capture things that are coming on the tax rolls rather than lose them forever.
Thank you, Linda. Phil.
I guess we've been through this before, of course, and my feeling is I think we all need to be supportive of the mission of the MTD and make sure that this entity is adequately funded. And I believe that we could do what we are doing today next year and in the future with less than an 18% increase in our property tax levy. I work every day in debt collection and real estate, and I work with families that struggle to afford housing in our community, seniors that are struggling to pay their taxes, people that are struggling to pay rent. And a substantial portion of why housing is so unaffordable in our district is that there are many, many taxing entities that are taxing too much. And I agree, this is a small drop in the bucket, but the reality is, if we want to get metaphorical, if this bucket overflows, if Carl's properties come on the tax roll and we have this money coming down from heaven, if we put out a measuring cup instead of a bucket and it overflows, we're going to be okay at 3 or 4%, but that additional percentage overflows to all of the taxpayers in our district. So that working mother who's paying $650 a month to hold down that 2-bedroom apartment, her rent the next year might not increase because our taxes will go down. Instead of having to pay $50 in taxes on that apartment to support MTD, it might be $42. And if every taxing district that had a surplus, that had enough money to build a hockey arena and all the other amazing things we do, could give just a little bit back when Carl comes back on the rolls, just a little bit back in property tax relief to the hardworking people that are struggling to get by in the middle of this pandemic, I think our community would be better for it. We do some amazing things here, and I get excited about what we do, but we also have to realize that there's a much bigger community with much greater needs than our district. So I would, I'd like to compromise and propose that maybe we raise this by 5% instead of 18%. And we give a little bit back to hardworking families that are struggling to get by in these really difficult times. That'd be my proposal. That'd be the motion I would put forward if I could.
I got a question.
Go ahead, Bruce.
In previous years, we run this thing in the newspaper, for example, and I suppose in other outlets, in a way that it can be no less said that it's absolutely confusing to the public. Is there some way to take a great deal of care in fashioning this so that the public can read it as opposed to Fred?
I assume that is the state statute. It has to
That's
be
correct.
languages. I mean, I suppose you could do some sort of a simple language explanation, but from a publishing standpoint, you have requirements.
We've done that. The black box requirement. So the actual notification that we're required to do. Our attorneys write that, and they write it the way that they write it because it has to comply with the law. The last several years, we've published a notice, an unofficial notice right next to the official notice, trying to explain that, Bruce, in a little bit more of a human, non-attorney fashion.
I just say we're still human, Carl. I didn't like that implication.
I thought you might enjoy that.
We could do what Napoleon would do when he issued an order, first give it to his privates and to see if they could understand what he's asking the generals to do. And if they came back and said they couldn't, he would rewrite it. So it's a question now of asking the public before we publish it, do you understand this? And keep adjusting it until we do. I say.
Thanks, Bruce. Anything else, Carl? Any other board members have comment? We do have a motion from Phil. Any other board comment on this item?
Sorry, if what Phil is asking for becomes a motion, I definitely would like an opportunity.
I understand. Well,
I have a comment.
Go ahead. Or I'm sorry, Linda.
If we get a windfall, the problem with putting out a cup right now is we don't know if we're going to get a windfall or not. So probably not going to be on the board at that point, but I think once we get those properties, if we get those properties on board, then and we have those tax dollars coming in, that would be a time to maybe reduce the rate all the way across or something. I think it's a little premature now to say, let's just reduce it because we're going to come up short.
Thanks, Linda. Margaret.
Well, I was going to point out that Phil's motion is a second.
Yes, I know. And I was actually going to mirror Linda's thoughts. So, if we were to add to the tax base, I would assume that would be the appropriate time to look at the rate and maybe make an appropriate adjustment to the rate to, match up. I don't necessarily see this as a windfall in dollars. I see this as potentially a windfall in tax base. So that would be my thoughts on that. With that, we'll ask for a second to Phil's motion.
I think I need to craft the motion a little differently than maybe what you and Linda are thinking. I was, we don't technically levy a percentage, we levy a dollar amount. So I would put forth a compromise motion that we levy $9,950,421. That's 5% more than we collected last year. So the way that levy would go out and be extended would be, it would be extended against our tax base. If it exceeds our PETL amount, it'll be cut down to that. So if Carl doesn't come on the rolls, odds are there's not going to be any substantial increase in tax base this year. That will come out as the maximum amount we could levy anyway. But in the event of a windfall, that number would cap our levy and it would be extended against a much larger base. And it would result in a 5% increase in the event of a levy, with the remainder going to other taxpayers to reduce what they pay. So we would, you know, regardless of whether Carl comes on or not, we would be levying more, but potentially capping it at 5% instead of at 18%, which would be 11,195,377. So my motion would be that we levy 5% more than last year, or we're going to levy $9,950,421. It's still a substantial increase, probably the maximum we can get unless Carl comes on the tax rolls. And in the event we have a windfall, that would allow our taxpayers to have some level of tax relief. So that would be my motion.
Going on 2.5 hours.
Thanks. Bruce, did you have a comment?
No, sorry.
All right. So while I'll just comment on your motion. I appreciate your thoughts on that. The only, my only concern with that is, there's a number of conclusions that you've drawn there that you may have done some really extensive math on. And I appreciate that. My only thought on your motion is that by doing it the way we've done it traditionally, it covers all of our bases and we don't have to do any math and we don't have to make any assumptions. We kind of cover the potential issue that's coming. And if it doesn't happen, we don't have to worry about it. It just takes care of itself. So that's my only comment on that. Again, for your motion requires a second. And hearing none, I appreciate your motion though, Phil, and I appreciate your thoughts on that. I really do. Any further discussion on the resolution as crafted? Hearing and seeing none, I'll ask for a motion and a second on the resolution as presented by staff.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve resolution 2020-4 for the tax levy. Roll call, please.
Barnes,
Yes.
Bauer,
Yes.
Chaplin,
Yes.
Delgado,
Yes.
Vasella,
Nay.
Hannon,
Yes,
Dial.
Yes, the motion carries. Our next action item is the Village of Rantoul Eagle Express Transportation Service Intergovernmental Agreement. That's a part of C-Carts.
I'm going to turn this over to Evan Alvarez, our Special Services Manager, to take. Evan?
Yeah, so this is a renewal of the service that we've been running in Rantoul for the last 4 years or so. Because, right, it's COVID and nothing is going quite the way that it would have before. This is just a 1-year renewal. We're maintaining basically the same level of service. This just needs to be approved for us to continue doing that. We've made a few scheduling changes just to redistribute time a little bit better and respond to some passenger concerns. But mostly the only changes are geared towards kind of COVID contingencies.
Thanks, Evan. Evan, just a question. Am I correct in thinking that this service is actually, we're seeing a ridership increase in this service? Is that accurate?
We actually kind of are. Yeah, ridership has been booming for a few reasons. One, this is a service that's really geared towards employment. We design the schedule around Rantoul route times and around Rantoul, like the factory shift times. So we're really geared towards getting people to those shifts and getting them back home, because almost all of those factories were deemed essential. Employment hasn't been interrupted there. And like MTD, C-Carts has suspended fare enforcement. So now that people can ride without a fare, we've actually seen a pretty substantial increase in ridership.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Any board comment on this item? Seeing none, I'll ask for a motion and a second to approve the Village of Rantoul Eagle Express Transportation Service Intergovernmental Agreement.
So move.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve this item. I'll ask for a roll call.
Barnes,
Yes.
Bauer,
Yes.
Chaplin,
Yes.
Delgado,
Yes.
Vasella,
Yes.
Hannon,
Yes.
Dial.
Yes, that motion carries. Our next item is the Urbana-Champaign Sanitary District MTD Intergovernmental Cooperation Agreement for our potential solar facility and operation.
Jane?
Yes, thanks. This action item is related to the solar array we've been talking about a little bit with you guys, that we've been discussing with the sanitary district across the street from our facilities in Urbana. We applied for a capital grant to fund the capital expense of that solar array, and we've gotten a positive indication on that. They haven't officially announced awards, but it is looking like we will be able to fund the majority of that with this state capital grant. So we've been moving forward with negotiating the lease agreement with the sanitary district. And I'll remind you, the plan is to use this solar energy to power our hydrogen station that will produce the fuel for our zero emission buses. Excuse me. I will orient us a little bit, maybe.
Ryan, can you advance the slide?
Okay, thanks, Ryan. Okay, so you see the sanitary district property to the north and our property to the south. And Ryan's gonna advance so that we can zoom in a little bit. One more, thank you. So I'm zooming in on the sanitary district property here. What I've shown in blue is where the solar panels will go. So we've got some on the south side of the roof of their sludge storage area. And then we've got about 8 acres of land that they are willing to lease to us for these panels. So that's what it looks like. If you go to the next slide, Ryan, we can look at the financials a little bit. So our lease rate is a little complicated. So I've created a little visual here that makes sense in my brain. I don't know if it makes sense to anyone else, but if we look at if we focus on the first 10 years, it's a pretty simple lease rate that starts at $20,000 that MTD would pay to the sanitary district. And then we've just got a 2.25% escalation every year from there. And then year 11 is when things get a little different. Where we will, instead of paying that 20% with, the 20,000 with the escalation, we'll pay 25% of the value of the energy that is produced each year. So if you advance again, Ryan, when we look at the total number of hydrogen fuel cell buses that will be in our fleet that we plan to add to the fleet over the next couple of years, by the time we get to 11 years, we will likely be exceeding the energy use. We will be exceeding the energy that the solar array will produce. Let me try and explain that again. We estimate that the solar array will produce about 3 megawatts of energy per year. And that is about what 12 buses would use, and will be beyond 12 buses probably before 10 years. I hope that made sense. So
can I just
sure.
So what Jane is saying is that in years 1 through 10, we'll be producing 3 megawatts of energy, but we will not be using 3 megawatts of energy for the hydrogen production station. That overage, we get a credit from Ameren, so that power will go to the grid that we don't use, and we get a credit from them that we can use in the month that it's produced and is turned into a credit. So we do get a benefit from it, but we don't get, we're just not going to need to use all of it in the beginning. Once we get to that 12 bus threshold, we'll actually be using more than 3 megawatts of energy to produce the hydrogen. And so we will either be using this solar array that we're talking about, plus an expansion to the solar array, or we will be using this solar array plus energy from the grid, or we will be using this solar array plus an expansion plus energy from the grid, or we may decide to add a wind turbine or some other thing in the future, but we'll use more than what we can produce from this.
Thanks. So if we look at the costs and more importantly, I think the savings of this whole project. So when you add up the lease payments over our 30-year lease period, and we estimate what that 25% production value would be, we're at about $750,000 over that 30-year period. And when we estimate the savings, we're at a much higher number, about 10 million. So that's calculated. That's the number that we would be spending. That's the estimated number that we would be spending if we were purchasing this electricity from the grid for this 30-year period. So you can see a great amount of savings there. You might be thinking about the capital cost too. And I'm talking about operating expenses here, but just for conversational purposes, if we add the capital in there, this $5.8 million that we're estimating the solar array to cost, which we expect to fund mostly with grant dollars, this is where we get to in terms of the cost and the savings. So still a great benefit in savings there. The only other thing I'll add is our lease rate. Our lease with the sanitary district is an eligible operating expense, so it will be covered with 65% state funds. What I show here is total dollars, not just local dollars. And the last thing I'll mention is the sanitary district presented this to their board yesterday and got a positive response. So we have every indication that this should be able to move forward should you guys approve it. Thanks.
Thanks, Jane. Anybody questions from the board on this item?
I have a question.
Go ahead, Bruce.
In her, I presume that was Jane, in her operating green block, she has it minus 10 million, and that was savings of 10 million, and then the cost side, it's a minus also. A little hard to figure out why both are minus.
Yeah, sorry about that. That is meant to be a little squiggly, formerly known as a tilde, which I learned. And so I just meant that it was an estimate. I didn't mean for that to be
it means approximately.
Additional questions from the board? Phil.
I was just curious about the lease. Just looking at that picture kind of jogged my mind to working with hogs in metal buildings and sludge storage and life expectancies of metal buildings with hogs. And I guess my question would be, looks to be a metal building. What is our situation in the lease if that building deteriorates to the point where it's not structurally sound in the 30 years because of how, at least with hogs, how corrosive sludge can be to steel structures?
So the sanitary district, they've done some preliminary studies on the structure, and everything looks positive and it looks like it will last the life of the lease. They're doing a more detailed study. I think they're in the process of it right now. So we will know that before we sign this. And I believe, I don't know if Fred, you've read this latest version, but my memory is that it's the sanitary district's responsibility to continue to maintain that to the point where we can continue to use it.
So if we need to remove our panels in order to construct a new building or put a new roof on it and then replace them, would that be the sanitary district's expense to remove those panels and reinstall them?
A couple things. If the roof needs to be replaced as a result of the sludge, I'm loving this conversation, by the way, the 14-year-old in me, then they are responsible for the roof. We would have to remove the panels for the roof to be replaced and then reinstall. And if the roof needs to be replaced as a result of something happening due to the panels being there, then we would be responsible for repairing the roof and taking the panels off and on.
I guess I just asked that you maybe make whoever our engineers are physically go through that building and like look at screws and stuff.
So Jane mentioned that they're having an analysis done. That is an engineering firm that is doing that, and so our engineers have looked at this. They're solar panel experts. They're not roofing experts, but they have looked at it. And then there are structural engineers that have been hired to do an analysis of the roof.
Thanks, Phil. Additional questions from the board on this item?
Mr. Chair, not the board, but
Go ahead.
quick comment. Page 62 does at least have, again, this is the finance director, Michelle Wright, not an attorney. So an attorney can correct me. But on page 62, it does have a paragraph that says cooperation, which seems promising with the concerns you have.
Thanks, Michelle. Anything else from board members on this item? Hearing none, I'll ask for a motion to consider the cooperation agreement between the Urbana-Champaign Sanitary District and the MTD for our solar facility.
I move that we approve this agreement as distributed.
Second.
Second.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded to approve our agreement with the Urbana-Champaign Sanitary District. Roll call, please.
Barnes,
Yes.
Bauer,
Yes.
Chaplin,
Yes.
Delgado,
Yes.
Vasella,
Yes.
Hannon,
Yes.
Dial.
Yes, that motion carries. Our next item is the City of Urbana MTD right-of-way license agreement.
I got a statement. Brad?
Go ahead. Bruce?
Yeah, I have to go.
All right. Thank you. Let the record show that board member has left the meeting.
Okay, I'm on page 79 of your board packet. This is a related item. In order to connect the energy from the solar array to our hydrogen station, we have to go underground along Hickory Street. Ryan, could you advance? Having trouble with my clicker. Thank you. Here's our same photo. One more, Ryan, please. This red line that's going to pop up just shows the right-of-way license agreement location that we need to execute with the City of Urbana. There's an annual fee and a small one-time fee, and this allows us to run conduit under that public right-of-way.
Board comment on this intergovernmental agreement. License agreement. I'm sorry, it's not an intergovernmental agreement. Questions? Seeing none, I'll ask for a motion and second.
So move.
Seconded.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the license agreement with the City of Urbana for right-of-way. Roll call, please.
Barnes,
Yes.
Bauer,
Yes.
Chaplin,
Yes.
Delgado,
Yes.
Vasella,
Yes.
Hannon, Dial.
Yes, that motion carries. Our next item is our hydrogen production station fence change order.
All right, this is my last one. I'm on page 92. This is related, but really just focused on our hydrogen station. This is the production station for our upcoming hydrogen fuel cell buses. And in the contract we have with Trillium, the company that's designing and building this station, we are looking to add a wall and a fence around the station. And we've got the red dotted line is where the louvered fence is slated for, and then the orange perimeter is where we have this concrete block wall that we're proposing. And the reason for this change is really maximizing security, durability, safety, and appearance, and minimizing noise. That I won't go into too much detail on that since it's in my memo, but this we think is an important change for this project and much needed, and will provide a lot of benefit. And we're able to cover all these this whole cost with our federal grant. I'll stop there.
And to be clear, so this is basically, a lot of this is to be a good neighbor to our folks that live in the area that are potentially need to listen or will have to listen to the plant running 24 hours a day, potentially.
Certainly.
Probably.
Yeah.
So, okay. All right. Additional questions from the board on this item? Seeing none, we'll ask for a motion second.
I move we approve this change order.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the change order for the fence at the hydrogen production station. Roll call, please.
Barnes,
Yes.
Bauer,
Yes.
Chaplin,
Yes.
Delgado,
Yes.
Vasella,
No.
Dial.
Yes, that motion carries. Next item and our last action item for today is the insured cash sweep. Michelle.
So Busey Bank recommended that we look at using the Insured Cash Sweep, which is a product that's a network of several different banks, probably from all over, not just here, but would then be able to have the complete FDIC coverage of each of those banks. And like I say, right now we had about 27 million on deposit. We recently received our first quarter advance payment from IDOT, which was about 10 million. We have another 7.5 million coming. Now IDOT is now paying monthly, not quarterly, and we have not received the payment yet for October. But we had a call earlier today, and they will be processing the October and November probably at the same time, since November is coming soon. So in theory, hopefully in a couple weeks or so, we would have another 7 million. Now with all the projects that just got approved, some money will be leaving at some point. But with federal grant money, I guess we'll get it back. So we'll still have to have someplace to put this money. So I guess I say Busey recommended this. It would be a portal that we'd be able to access and should have complete control of the funds, just like we would if the money were still sitting at Busey. Any other questions about that?
Michelle, do you want to explain the Durbin Amendment and the Dodd-Frank, or Durbin Amendment to the Dodd-Frank Act a little bit?
Sure. One thing Busey is trying to be prepared for is the Durbin Amendment to the Dodd-Frank Act says that if a bank reaches 10 billion in assets, that they are not allowed to charge the amount of fees they normally can for debit cards. And Busey would rather not have to experience that. So this is one way that they're hoping not to get to that level. And that is a measurement day at the end of the year. So the plan would be probably that we would move our money now and then probably move it back in February. But we'll just see. I think they do have eventual plans of blasting right past that 10 billion. And at that point, they'd be able to better structure it and be able to absorb the fee loss in other ways.
Dick.
Will the interest rates vary from bank to bank?
I think that is true. And that's a question I should ask. I don't think it's going to be just one set rate at every bank. I think it could vary.
I thought they said that we would get the same interest rate. I'm not going to be able to say why I thought they said that, if that was in an email or a phone conversation.
Just in their promotional items here, they just say put excess cash balances at work in demand accounts, money market deposits, or both. You can put your excess cash balances to work in demand deposit accounts. I don't think there's going to be anything in this generic agreement that says what the rates would be, but we'll definitely find that out.
And I will say, we don't have any gangbuster rates. You know, even if there is some moderation to the rate, it's not likely to be meaningful. But we'll get an answer to that question.
And in all likeliness, very short term.
Correct.
Does that sound right, Michelle?
Yes.
Very short term.
Especially
we're technically we're doing them a short term favor, basically, to get them past this reporting period. Is that accurate?
correct.
Okay.
It will kind of lead into the future plans of redoing
Sure.
the investment policy and
Sure.
really take a look at this. What we're
Sure.
doing.
So we'll be looking at the larger picture in the future. Additional questions from the board? Anybody in electronic land? No? Hearing and seeing none, I'll ask for a motion and second to.
So motion.
It's been moved and seconded to participate in the Busey Insured Cash Sweep Agreement. Roll call, please.
Barnes,
Yes.
Bauer,
Yes.
Chaplin,
Yes.
Delgado,
Yes.
Vasella,
Yes.
Dial.
Yes, that motion carries.
Brad, I do see in this agreement, it is just a sample agreement, but there is a section about comparing rates, and it does put the onus on us to compare rates prior to the transfer being made. So I think that that's something that Michelle would have an opportunity to look at before we trigger.
Sure, before you
a transfer.
institute this, absolutely.
And then Jane found another paragraph on page 102 that says the interest rate for your deposit accounts at destination institutions on any day will be the then current rate we establish for them, which may be any rate, including zero, and which we may modify at any time.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Yes, Margaret.
I thought of a question I should have asked. Busey will choose these banks that they're depositing in, not us. Is that correct?
I'm not sure that Busey does. Busey is going to be the parent organization in this network, and this insured cash sweep is an independent third party. And so I'm not entirely sure how they determine which banks are in, and I can find that out also. And I do know that we have the ability to exclude banks. Like if we're already doing business with the bank, we'll be already covered by their FDIC insurance. And with our balances, we usually have additional collateralization beyond that. So we will exclude those banks. But I'll check on how the banks get in.
All right. Be perfectly honest. Oh, no, I know where we're at. Sorry. Our next item, our next meeting will be a public hearing for the tax levy, followed by, or actually in Congress with the regular Board of Trustees meeting, and that will be Wednesday, December 9th, 2020 at 3:00, and that will be available virtually through the MTD website. Our next action today will be to adjourn to closed session, which I will ask Margaret to read that in a moment. We'll be considering salary schedules and for one or more classes of employees. Then we will be adjourning our meeting directly. There will be no further public board action after our closed session. Margaret.
I move to adjourn into closed session to consider the appointment, employment, compensation, discipline, performance, or dismissal of specific employees of the district, and to consider deliberations concerning salary schedules for one or more classes of employees, followed by adjournment.
And Brad, if I could just say, Amy, you're welcome to stay on. And I was just going to say, oh no, Emily, I'm glad to see that you were participating today, but I'd ask you to disconnect. And Evan, I'd ask you to disconnect. And then all the board members, Fred and Amy, can stay on the Zoom portion.
Okay.
Need a second.
And I would like to second Margaret Chapin's.
Thank you. Roll call, please.
Barnes,
Yes.
Bauer,
Yes, although I can't go to the session, but yes.
Chaplin,
Yes.
Delgado,
Yes.
Vasella,
Yes.
Dial.
Yes. Motion carries.
Still have a quorum?
We're gonna have to do this. I need to leave in